Welcome to Talking Teaching, a University of Melbourne podcast where educational research, innovation and classroom practice come together. I'm your host, Dr. Sophie Specjal, and today we are talking about maths education. Today we're exploring the question at the centre of many educational debates. How can we as educators use AI effectively? And joining me here today from the Faculty of Education here at the University of Melbourne is Dr. Scott Cameron, who is a lecturer in AI and technology in maths education. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Sophie.
And joining Scott today is Dr. Carmel Mesiti, who is a senior lecturer and expert in math pedagogies for both primary and secondary education. Welcome, Carmel.
Hi, Sophie.
Joining Scott and Carmel from Cardinia International College is Mr Luke Clift, who was the head of mathematics, and he is a practicing teacher trialling AI in lesson planning and its use and impact in the classroom. Welcome.
Thank you, Sophie. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, and it's terrific always to have practitioners and those who are in the classroom here on Talking Teaching. So let's start with some context. The scale of AI's arrival has been rapid, and for some it's really overwhelming. There's a whole bunch of tools. People often refer to ChatGPT, and then there's tools within ChatGPT. So I'd love to know, and I'll start with you, Scott, what's driving such an intense interest in AI particularly for maths education?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting and fascinating tool. The fact that it came out and you could just log in and engage with it in a really natural, conversational way. You can just say, what should I do for this class, or explain this concept for me? So it's really a natural way that users can engage to it that I think has really led to that uptake because it's so easy and free in many ways. It's also come at a time when there's a lot of debate and discussion going on in mathematics education, as well as teaching more broadly. So it's happening at the same time as discussion around teacher workload, as well as upskilling the teaching workforce. And so it's presented itself perhaps as a potential solution in the way that many technologies do, even though we don't know what purpose it's being used for, but it's worth exploring how could it be used, or does it have the potential to address some of these issues.
And for you, Carmel, you're working with teachers on the ground, and your role here at the university allows you to get in and have those conversations with teachers. Can you tell us a little bit about that work and what sort of conversations that you're having around AI in mathematics specifically?
So with the teachers that I work with, we're careful when talking about using AI to think about what we want it to do for us. When working with teachers, I'm encouraging them to be quite reflective about using any new resource. When I first spoke to Scott about, our research, and that's already over a year, I think now, Scott, we were thinking, okay, this is another new technology. How can it be harnessed in order to support teachers with their workload? So although when I work with teachers, I'm not specifically referring to how to use Gen AI. It's more about what kind of mindset have you got when you work with technology? Are you being critical about its use? And are you reflecting on what it produces for you? So it's not that we're looking for technology to provide all the answers that teachers are looking for, but how can it help you so that your workload is reduced? And maybe it can offer you some new ideas as well.
So that leads beautifully on to you, the work that you've been doing at Cardinia.
I think from my personal experience, it's definitely changed the way that I approach lesson planning in particular. I think that the ability to, I suppose, have a resource that you can work with as opposed to replacing the teaching expertise there just opens up a possibility to change the mental load of teachers in the planning in particular of our resources. We talk a lot at the moment about teacher workload as in the hours that teachers are doing and planning is one of those big ones, but there's also everything else that comes with teaching. We're not talking a lot at the moment. I haven't heard a lot about the teacher workload from a mental point of view. And I think this is where AI could help reduce that mental load. And for me, it allows that mental load to be reduced in some aspects, but then allows me then to think critically about what I'm planning and how I'm planning it. And I think that's really been a different way of approaching teaching and planning.
So are students talking to you about
They're
AI?
definitely using it.
They're definitely using it.
You know, I've walked around the study hall room and there's ChatGPT is open on many browsers. So the kids are using it. They're interested. The students, I think at the moment, are a little bit unsure about how to use it and how to use it correctly. And I think that's one thing as teachers we probably need to be better at, is actually communicating with our students about where you can use it, how you can use it, and also the safety aspects and the ethical uses and things like that. So I think some schools are doing that fairly well, but I think there's more room for improvement there. And I think within the classroom, I've definitely encouraged talk about it with my students to sort of bring it to the open. But there's more work to be done there, I think, for myself, but also for everyone in this school community.
I know that we've here on Talking Teaching, we've had many guests talking about AI in different contexts and the possibilities in using it. I'll come back to you, Scott. What do we know about the quality of AI-generated lesson plans, especially in maths?
And that's one of the really key things that Carmel and I have been looking at over the last 12 to 18 months. It's taking this idea of, yes, we can do things quickly, but if the output is no good, then we're potentially doing damage if we take that into the classroom and use it as is. And it really varies. There's a great deal of variability in terms of the quality, but we've generated probably hundreds of lesson plans by now, all on the same topic, and none of them tick the boxes as something we would take and just use. But there might be an element of one lesson plan which is good, and we could take that aspect but change the rest. And so it's really that need to have that critical insight in the same way that teachers have when they're working with any resource, that it's got to be adapted and fit for the use of your students. And that's probably not going to come from either a stock lesson plan or a textbook or a Gen AI created lesson plan in this context.
When we decided to generate these lesson plans, we chose a topic that teachers find challenging to teach and to explain from a conceptual point of view. So we looked at the division of fractions. And I know that when I mention division of fractions, a lot of people are imagining changing the division sign to a multiplication sign and flipping the fraction. And I think a lot of people don't know why that works. And that's problematic, in my opinion, when we're working with students, when we want them to understand a process or a skill, what's actually happening. So, for example, if I were starting to teach something like that, I would say to you, Sophie, imagine 2 bars of chocolate. How many halves are there? Instead of saying to you, 2 divided by a half. So, conceptually, I'm trying to get you to imagine these bars of chocolate, divide them in halves, and then count the number of halves. And that's probably a really good way to start if you're introducing the topic of division of fractions or working with students in that way. Rather than having an algorithm that you get good at if you repeat that skill mindlessly, but maybe don't actually understand what's physically happening or what you're counting or what you're identifying. So that's why we picked that as a topic for our first area of interest when we were preparing our lesson plans and wanted to see what was generated. And of course, what you find is that the lesson plans just produce the algorithm and say, this is the skill. Here are some examples, go off and do it. Conceptually, it wasn't meeting our criteria for good lesson planning.
But if we can just stay there in the sense of when you were talking about those important high-impact teaching strategies, have you found that your research has shown that those things can come together effectively for teachers and their lesson planning?
In very limited cases. I think from our initial study, which looked at these lesson plans, we got a broad sense of what the lesson could include. So we could identify strategies such as a whole class discussion or assessment practices. But what was missing was, well, in that whole class discussion around division of fractions, what are the prompts that a teacher might use, such as what's the object being counted? Can you think of similar problems? Can you think of other ways to solve this problem? Why does the rule work? So it gives advice on perhaps what could happen in the classroom, but not necessarily the advice that a teacher would need to have a meaningful discussion reflecting the content in that lesson plan. So it's very broadly what could happen in the lesson, but not necessarily how to do it.
And how do you think that that actually varies from, say, some really great math materials that are either in a textbook or or on our curriculum website with information and accessibility that highlight and focus on mathematics? Is it quite different? Do you think that there are benefits in bringing the two together?
I think part of it depends on what the purpose of the lesson plan is for. We recognise an experienced teacher would be able to take that broad structure for a lesson and fill in the gaps because they've got that pedagogical content knowledge of what the good questions to ask are or the examples to use. And so in that case, they can perhaps overcome the shortcomings of the Gen AI lesson plan. On the other end, if we have those novice teachers or someone perhaps out of field or not familiar with the content themselves, they're perhaps not going to have the skill or the knowledge to fill in those gaps. And so what this could mean is that they're potentially getting this Gen AI lesson plan, taking it into class, and then having that lesson fall flat because they can't fill in those gaps and overcome the weaknesses in the lesson plan. And I would say that's true of any resource, whether it's a textbook, a stock lesson plan, is that need to think about it critically before it's used and go, are there aspects I need to fill in based on my own understanding of my students and what they need, or do I actually need to choose a different resource?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Luke, I'll come to you about that. Can you share an example of meaningful learning design and how you or your colleagues are using this technology?
Yeah, totally agree with what Scott sort of said there. I think that good resources, whether it be textbooks or collegial resources that schools and districts or departments have, still very vital. And I think if we start from that as a good base, then that will then help us get to something that is useful with Gen AI. Some teachers are still staying away from it. But if we have good resources, then we can start to refine those resources into something that is applicable to how we want to teach it, and using our expertise to then make something that is usable and enhances our lessons. So for me, the way that I've been using it is using those resources as a starting point, not going out to the, let's grab everything that these large language models are grabbing from the world. Starting off with good resources and then refining them to tailor my lessons and continually improve them year after year, hopefully, so my students get the best out of them.
And that's ultimately what we want, isn't it? Having that knowledge and that pre-planning and all of those additional components, and then using that on top, you think is one of the more effective ways of doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's one takeaway, if the listeners to hear today, if there's one takeaway, if they're wanting to start the journey, is I'd say that, start with the resources you've got and use that as the starting point to inform the AI. For example, sometimes textbooks have slabs of text. It's no good for me and it's no good for the students, but they're really good at summarising stuff. So you can get them to summarise it into some key points that then you can use, the students can use, and you still need to use your expertise to see if it's useful or not. But then you can start to do something and save that time, save that mental load, and to really start your journey, I suppose, in using it.
So if we're talking about AI and its use for teacher workload, Luke, I'll stay with you. How do you navigate the difference between efficiency and supporting high expectations when using AI?
It's hard. There's got to be someone in your schools or in the community that's going to have to do that work. Teachers got to understand also that when you're using this for the first time, that you're not going to be as efficient as when you get to a stage where you're starting to use it in a more automatic sort of way. And the more you use it, as with any tool or any sort of system, you'll start to get more proficient in it. So I think that's important to understand that it's not going to save me time straight away, but the more you use it, it might get there. But I would say start off with these small things, and that's where you'll see little improvements. Even if it's 5 minutes on a lesson plan, if you add that over the course of a year, you've saved yourself a week of work.
So, Scott, what do we know about content and effective use, and perhaps linking it back to that notion of procedural and conceptual knowledge as well?
Yeah, so one of the really powerful things that Carmel and I have explored is the impact that the prompt can have. And it can be a great difference between, typing in, make me a lesson plan on the division of two fractions is very simple. It will get you something. But the more detailed that prompt is, it can provide a better output for you. And one of the really powerful ways we've found is to use a strategy called meta prompting. Instead of telling it to complete the task, say, I'm going to ask you to prepare a lesson plan. What information do you need from me in order to prepare it? And so when you use that strategy, instead of getting your lesson plan, you'll get a series of questions such as, what are your learning outcomes? Are there any resources, pedagogical approaches that you wish to favour? What learning needs are there? And we found when we've trialled this with teachers is they've found that process of working through those questions to be the most important thing, because it encourages that expertise that they have to think about their classroom. And it takes longer. By the time they've worked through all these questions, we've had teachers turn around and go, well, I could have just planned this myself. But the point of getting them reflecting on their teaching is the really powerful thing. And I think that's one of the ways for teachers to use it is not to expect it to have the output, but to engage as that sort of guide on the side going, Sophie, why are you doing it this way? Is there another way you want to think about it, so that you can be really deliberate in your choices? And then if you go through, you get an output, which is then going to be reflective of the strategies that you wanted to include in the lesson anyway.
But the prompting obviously really matters then, and that's what has come through in your research as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. With the prompting, you're encouraging teachers to engage in that reflective process, which we consider to be the most important aspect of teaching. We all know, we've been in the classroom, you try things out, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work, but it's important to reflect on why that is. And that could be because of the students that you are teaching, and that could be because of your preferential pedagogical practices. We all have practices that we preference ahead of others, and of course we develop an expertise in that. Any lesson that is produced or provided or supported is basically a framework for you to adapt to you, to your teaching style, but to the students in the classroom. And that's a message that I really try to make quite strongly when I work with our teacher candidates, is we don't expect everything to work for every classroom that we have, because we have students with very, very different backgrounds and experiences. And anyone who's taught would know that you could have 2 Year 8 maths classrooms that you're teaching, and what works with one doesn't work with another. So in thinking about that, becoming that reflective practitioner is really important. And if that meta prompting supports that skill that you're developing, that's a really, really good thing. But again, recognising that there's no easy solution for teaching. It's a complex space, very, very challenging. We need a range of resources to support us. But ChatGPT or any Gen AI, there's something that it can support you to do, but of course you have to be critical in how you use it. And I think that's probably one of our main messages here.
I wonder, what have you seen in your research that AI is critical for teaching and learning, and particularly for the teacher candidates that you're working with?
That's a really good question, because every time Scott and I get together, we're always coming up with new ideas, new things that we want to research about Gen AI. If you think about Gen AI as an intelligence, which of course some people might argue against, we can ask ourselves, what is Gen AI's pedagogical content knowledge, and what is their content knowledge? And it's become quite clear since it started that its content knowledge has improved. So in other words, it's able to do straight maths problems quite well. But of course, as teachers, it's not just the content that we need to know. We need to know how to teach the content that we want to teach, how to engage in that practice, this whole big idea of pedagogical content knowledge. So we devised a research to address that. Scott, do you want to tell them a little bit more about what we did?
Yeah, certainly. So what we looked at was assessing the pedagogical content knowledge of a range of AI tools. So looking at ChatGPT as well as Gemini, Claude, and some of the other competitors. And we used an existing instrument which has a range of different content and pedagogical content items Things like a student says, I don't understand why -1 times -1 equals +1. How many different ways could you support this student? And so we fed these items into these Gen AI tools and then collaborated with some mathematicians to look and go, is the reasoning and the logic used by ChatGPT actually correct? And the motivation for this is thinking, well, if you're a teacher at a school and perhaps you don't have those experts in your area, or you're somewhere rural, or you're a new teacher, you might go to these tools to ask for advice. And what we found was for each item, you get a range of different responses. About a third of them were incorrect or inconsistent with what would be expected or necessary for those students. So, for example, there was an item about misconceptions that students might have about identifying the height of a parallelogram. Now, the item said, draw a picture. This was before ChatGPT's latest update, when the picture looked absolutely horrendous and you couldn't identify a parallelogram at all. But it could accurately describe the two different cases where a parallelogram it might be rotated 90 degrees and they look from the top to bottom, or when the height is actually measured outside the parallelogram. So in that case, it was able to do well in a written form, but not in providing a diagram that might support the teachers. What we found with other items, and this was a benefit of working with a mathematician, is when they were using flawed logic. So perhaps the first part of the solution or the explanation assumed the result, so using circular logic, which Carmel and I, in some of those cases, we could identify ourselves. But getting the mathematics perspective was really powerful in actually identifying what those issues are. Now, the potential issue, and this was true for Carmel and I looking through these, if we couldn't identify those incorrect responses, we go, great, I've got 5 different ways how to develop understanding for that student, and 3 of them are wrong. So I'm potentially going into class thinking I'm really well prepared and teaching my students something that's incorrect.
I'm going to flick straight to our maths teacher. Can you add to this? Or...
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important not just for the teachers, but for the students. And that's where I've been encouraging teachers to talk to their students about this, because when you go to the study hall and you've got all these students and they're still using it as Google, they're just sort of like, what's the answer to X, Y, Z sort of thing. And it's spitting out an answer. And if they're not being critical, that's an issue as well. There needs to be some education from the teacher's point of view, but also the students need to be informed as well. And I think that's where I'm really passionate about talking about this with teachers, is because if the teachers know a bit more about this, they're able to drive this and they're able to talk about this with their students and feel comfortable with it, then the students will get better outcomes as well, because they'll be able to use it in a way that helps them with their learning and not just help me do my homework or something like that.
So, Luke, tell me about some of the conversations that you have with your colleagues around this. What do we need to be talking about? What's our focus here?
I think it's actually great that it's allowed us to actually have conversations about education that we actually haven't had. Like when it first came out, teachers are like, it's cheating. And therefore, they shied away from it because teachers are like, well, if I'm telling the kids they're cheating, I can't use it because I feel it's cheating as well.
Absolutely.
So therefore,
that's a great point.
We're starting to come out of that a little bit, because now it's become to a stage where it's now a bit more acceptable. So we need to get to a stage where we're comfortable talking about it and talking about when is it used well, when is it not used well,
and how.
And exactly, and how to use it, and how to use it in a proper, ethical way. And I think that's really important.
We will come back now to teacher workload.
I'll go back a little bit perhaps. So with the important conversation having with the teachers is how do we address that cognitive load on teachers, as we do expect on students, but when do we want that deep thinking? And I think this is where ChatGPT can enhance our critical thinking by, you could almost say, offloading some of that administrative tasks, and then allowing us to actually think deeper about what we're doing, why we're doing it. The root thing about using ChatGPT or any generative AI is there's one ATSL standard that I keep on going back to, and that is the first one: know your students and how they learn. And I think that anyone who has this debate about cheating, that sort of stuff, if you know your students and how they learn, then you can negate all of these issues, because that's core business and it can't escape that, this ChatGPT.
Absolutely.
Can I make a comment about assessment? It's more about our design of assessments that need to change, where students are allowed to input something into, for example, ChatGPT, and then critique what comes out of it, which would also demonstrate their expertise and their knowledge. So I think it's our assessments that need to change while we're working in this new era where these AIs can reproduce essays, for example. You can use them to brainstorm. So if you want some ideas, and although some of the ideas it generates may be incorrect, that's where your expertise comes in, so you can filter out the ones that are wrong. But it will give you alternative approaches that you may want to try.
Scott, can you just share some of the ideas behind the frameworks that are being co-designed with teachers that you're looking at?
Yeah, so what we're really interested in is this idea that ChatGPT or any Gen AI tool can act as that guide on the side, that teaching assistant who will do the work for you. You don't have to be particularly nice to them. You can be really direct and tell it exactly what you want, but you can offload some of that work. And so we're thinking about a holistic way of, well, what does that actually mean? What skills do teachers need in order to be able to use these tools in a way that supports them? So as we've talked about already, prompting is one of them because we know the impact that the prompt will have. But as Luke's talked about, there's this idea that teachers might see it as cheating or replacing them. And so there's that affective factor as well, where we need to actually go, well, it's just a resource in the same way that, you know, if you've got 10 different textbooks sitting on your desk and you pick and choose, they're resources as well that are there to support you. So we're looking at both the technical skills that teachers need, the pedagogical content knowledge that they need in order to evaluate the outputs, but also the affective. How do you come to view it as a legitimate tool that can support you, not something that's cheating or that's going to replace you?
What advice would you give to teachers or schools just starting?
I think that there's 2 points to it. First is play, right? They're free tools. There's new tools coming out all the time. And there's so much money being thrown in AI that it's not going to fail. It's going to be here in some form for the future. So if you're curious, log on, have a play. There's free versions and see what it can do. You might find it's something that for you isn't going to help at this point in time, and that's okay. Or you might start to get some ideas about what can happen as well. The other thing while you're playing is that critical view of it. It is a tool. There's biases that underpin its outputs. And so see it as, you know, that guide on the side that isn't always correct. So be critical, think about how it would work, whether it would work for you, and go from there.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice. Thank you.
And work with it with your students. So try to reveal the biases that these Gen AI have. So encourage your students to play. So teachers are playing, let's have our students play, but that they actually work together to critique it. So we model with them, questioning what its output is, that it's not always going to be 100% correct. We know that for a fact. Our research has proven that. But work with your students to identify what can be improved or what needs to be corrected.
Absolutely, and I'm sure they'll have lots to share as they're playing with different parts of that too. And back over to you.
I'll reinforce exactly what has been said here by Scott and Carmel. So if there was one thing that I'd say for teachers and for schools is that they should get a framework in place for their school and to really make an environment where teachers and students feel safe and supported in using it. Because I think that a lot of the times teachers and the students are sort of like, I don't know where to use it. I don't know how to use it. Can someone just tell me? So I think that's really important. And through that, there is discussions with colleagues and things like that. I've been very fortunate at my school that we've actually even dedicated meeting time to professional development for this as well. And I think that's really important to give teachers the time to talk about it. And to celebrate where it's been used really well, because I think we've talked about this idea that it's sort of been a little bit in the shadows in the past. If we can raise the profile of it a little bit more, we can talk about the good and the bad and where it can be used effectively.
Oh, thanks, Luke. Thanks for offering your insight, certainly from that classroom and school perspective. Just coming back to you, Scott and Carmel, can you tell us a little bit about the research and what you're doing, and perhaps how schools and teachers listening can get in touch with you guys?
Certainly, we would love to work with any interested teachers. We do want to really develop a framework to help and support teachers in critiquing what they're generating out of Gen AI. So that's one of the main research projects for next year and towards the end of this year. So please, teachers, if you would like to work with us, we would love to work with you. Please email myself and Scott. We're wanting to work with teachers because our research is for teachers, and we don't want to just produce something that as outsiders, we need our insiders involved as well.
And a key part of this podcast is reaching schools, teachers, academics, policymakers, but to come together for impact. And we'll post links with details with all of the emails from today and any other resources that the three of you would like to share with all of the listeners. I think that would be terrific for you to be able to connect in that way, and for listeners to be able to connect with you.
We've taken this project to try and help teachers sort of navigate this both really exciting but quite daunting change that's happening as Gen AI. And so, for us to work and support with teachers, we need teachers to work with. So we met Luke at a conference and invited him onto this podcast because we have similar ideas and really like what he's doing in his school. So really looking to connect with as many teachers as possible.
Absolutely. And Luke, we look forward to seeing lots of your outstanding examples as well. And also feel free to share anything that is happening at Cardinia and some of the work that you've been doing. Thank you, all three of you, for coming on today. So, as we've heard today, the future of AI in education is exciting, and teachers play a crucial role in bringing professional expertise, deep pedagogical knowledge, and a real understanding of learners, things AI simply cannot replicate yet. Thank you to Scott, Carmel and Luke for sharing your insights, and thank you all for listening and subscribing to Talking Teaching. Until next time, let's keep talking about teaching. Thank you to our entire podcast team. This podcast was recorded in April 2025. Talking Teaching would like to acknowledge the Kulin Nations, true owners, caretakers and custodians of the land from which we produce and broadcast. We pay respect to elders past and present of the Kulin Nation and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians listening. We also acknowledge the place of Indigenous knowledges at the university and in education.